Thank you. Good evening, everybody. We've obviously already had the disclaimer, so I won't make you read all this again. We'll move on. I apologise to those of you who've seen me before present, but I'm just going to give a bit of introduction to our business and where we sit in the market. Our business is a leading, fully integrated biopharmaceutical company based in the UK. We have a manufacturing facility in Worthing where we do our research as well, and we ship out across continental Europe and also to Canada and South Korea. Really, to talk about our business, the market as a whole is worth probably about $12 billion, and that's the allergy market. But most people, as you might, some of you in the audience here, you might suffer mild symptoms. So that means during the summertime, when the birch pollen's out or the grass is out or so on, that you suffer something, and then you'd have an antihistamine or corticosteroid or something fairly simple over-the-counter type of treatment. However, for about 10% of patients, they can't control their symptoms with this symptomatic treatment. And therefore, they look to something more sophisticated, and that's the immunotherapy that we offer. Now, within immunotherapy, there are quite a few different types of treatments, and the unique selling point of our business is the fact that we actually have an immunotherapy treatment, an injectable treatment, which takes 4 to 6 injections. And when you compare that to the competitors, in the injectable market, the competitors in Europe are using 12 to 15 injections, and in the US, which I'll come on to, they use 50 to 100 injections. So it's a huge improvement. There are also treatments on the oral side. All treatments work as well as the injectable treatments, but the problem is you need to take a tablet once every day for 3 years. So the issue is, for a lot of patients, is that if you start that sort of treatment, it's fine during the season, you suffer over the summer or whatever, you take the tablets, but once you get into the autumn or winter, at that stage, you have no longer any symptoms, so you simply stop taking it. And that's the problem. You need to ensure the patients continue till they finish the whole treatment. So our treatment, which is 4 to 6 injections, it means that a vast majority of the patients will actually take the proper treatment and will be significantly in a significantly better position having taken that treatment, potentially cured or potentially have much lower symptoms. The main platform, and I'll come on to talk a bit about the technology. I won't go too deeply into the technology, but is the Polyvac Quattro platform, and hence the 4 to 6 injections Polyvac Quattro treatment. As I mentioned, we're headquartered in Worthing in Sussex. We've got about 500 employees, roughly about half of them are in the UK, and the rest are spread out across Europe. We've had 10% compound annual growth rate since we spun out of GSK, which was 19 years ago. And I've already mentioned our position in the market with this what's called subcutaneous, which is an injected product, which is also aluminium-free. Our market capitalisation at the moment is between 150 and 160 million, and we're listed on the AIM market with a ticker AGY. I won't go into too much depth about the different technologies, but really across the top you can see the different varieties of technology. The second column is the original treatments, and that's the type of treatment you'll get in America, where you have a larger number of injections. Then what we've actually moved into more recent years is into an injection which uses a sophisticated adaptation of the allergen as well as the microcrystalline. That's a deposit. So what happens is that it's injected into your body and it takes 72 hours to release into your system, and that means that the effect lasts much longer, and with a smaller number of injections you have a bigger impact. And added to that, we've also got this technology, the MPL technology, which GSK uses in their products, particularly as some of you, if you're in the pharma area, you'll know there's a shingles product that they've brought out that's been very successful recently, and that uses MPL as well. And what it does is it adds a boost to the performance of the product. I will talk now about the strategy, and there are really three parts to our strategy. The first one is Europe. So in the European business, we had sales of about 68 million. It's a business, as I mentioned, that's been growing double digits, a very strong, powerful business with good margins, and it's profitable pre-research and development. The second pillar is the strong pipeline, and that pipeline has got both late-stage products as well as early-stage products, and I'll talk about that later. And thirdly, as I mentioned earlier about this market where currently you need between 50 and 100 injections, is the US market, which is a very interesting market and has a huge potential for the business. Moving on to the data for the year, just to give you a bit of an indication both from a geographic and a product split down. As you'll see, 61% of our sales are in Germany. That's the biggest market in Europe, so it's a key market for us. It's particularly an injectable market. But we also have reasonably sizable sales in Spain and Italy. Looking at the products, the key thing to look here is we do sell some oral products. That's the oral vac, which is 13%, but almost the rest of the portfolio is injectable. And we see injectable as the future. As I mentioned earlier, you have much higher compliance with injectable products. During the year, we had 2 trials that finished. We had the GRASS phase 2 trial, which is a trial both for the product in Europe, but also for the US. And this will bring great potential in the future to move towards the US market. Also completing in the year, we had the PQ Birch trial, although the results of that are still not read out, and they will come before the end of this year. Talking about the timeline for our GRASS products, and the GRASS product is the most advanced of our products in the portfolio, and particularly focused towards the US, which is a big potential market worth probably about $2 billion. You can see the phase 2 trial, which I mentioned earlier, which successfully completed at the end of May. The timing on this is that we'll probably move to our GRASS phase 3, and this is our pivotal second phase 3 trial in the US in the autumn of 2019. If all goes well and the trial is successful, we'll be looking to potentially file the product at the end of 2020, depending on obviously the results from the trial and also the agreement with the regulators. And we'd hope to get the product to market towards the end of 2021 or beginning of 2022. You might think that's a long way off if you've got a short horizon, but that's typical for pharma businesses. And and also the response we'll get from the market will reflect from obviously those points as we get through our trials. Moving on to the early stage pipeline. So I've talked about GRASS, which is in the late stage. We have 2 products in the early stage pipeline, which are very promising. The first one is the MITE product, and now that uses the same technology as a PQ GRASS, but for house dust mite. House dust mite is what's called a perennial allergen, so it happens the whole way through the year. It's particularly prevalent in southern Europe, but also the southern areas of the States. It itself has a much larger market, potentially $3 billion, and we've basically used the same technology as PQ to develop this product. At this stage, we're in a phase 1 trial, which will read out in the first half of next year. But what we've done is we've taken a prior product which doesn't use the MPL in it, and we're actually selling it on a named patient basis in Spain and Austria. And it's actually now our most successful product in Spain, so it gives you an idea of what the potential for it is out there. I talked about how important a limited number of injections were. This is a 8 injection product against 12 to 15 as the average of competitors. And this would also be a product which potentially we could take to the US market. But it would obviously be a lot later. I've talked about grass with the potential for end of 2021, beginning of 2022. This product would also have to go through a phase 2 trial and 2 phase 3 trials. So we're talking a significant number of years later, but it does have big potential. And finally in the pipeline we have the Polyvac Peanut product. You've probably seen a lot in the papers, and if you've travelled on EasyJet, you've probably heard one of those warnings on the flight not to open peanuts. It's a sad thing of the modern environment, but there are a lot of people who suffer from peanut allergies. There are 2 products which are in late development in the US for peanut. One of them is a patch you put on your arm or your back on a daily basis. This is a bit similar to an oral product in the sense you need to keep it on your skin once a day for up to 3 years. And the second problem is because it sits on the top of your skin, it doesn't have such a significant effect. The other product that's being developed at a late stage is a peanut extract which you add to food. The trouble with that is that really it just increases the tolerability. It doesn't actually cure or potentially cure the patient or make a significant effect, and you need to keep on taking it every day. What we're looking to develop, and obviously this is still at an early stage, this is in a preclinical stage at this point, is a product potentially which would have 3 injections and would actually create the immunotherapy effect. So in other words, not that you go and gorge on peanuts, but you could live in security and without actually worrying about the potential of suffering from eating a trace of peanuts or something, having peanut in your food and worrying about it. So this has a huge potential. It is, as I mentioned, some way off. We're still scaling up from our preclinical into an industrial manufacturing. So this probably won't get to market till probably the middle of the next decade. However, if I tell you, I shouldn't oversell, but if I tell you that those 2 companies I talked to at the beginning, whose technology is fairly simple, both of those are worth about $1 billion each. It gives you an idea of what investors think of the value. And we've estimated, it's very difficult to estimate because there are no products on the market at the moment, this could be worth about $8 billion, the market in peanut. So at the moment we're scaling up, that's going well, and the plan is to have our first in-human trial in the calendar year 2019. I talked about the US as being our 3rd pillar of our strategy, and I mentioned the potential US market, and that's just for the seasonal allergies of about $2 billion. The really key thing here, and it links obviously to my talking earlier about 50 to 100 injections, is that only 16% of people who start that treatment actually finish it. And you can imagine why. It's just, if you imagine every time you've got to go to the doctor, you have an injection, you have to wait to see what the effect of that is. So basically you're probably taking up to half a day for each injection. And if you think, if you're a working person or you're travelling or whatever, you've got other commitments, the chance of you sticking to having all those injections is pretty low. And even more shocking, half the patients that actually turn up to a surgery in America to talk about an allergy and potentially could have this treatment don't even start the treatment. And equally, you can imagine why that is. If you hear about this treatment, you think, well, maybe you can't stand having 100 injections, or potentially you simply look at that and think, I just can't fit it into my schedule. So there's a huge potential out there. What happens currently in the market is that allergists in various surgeries, what happens is they buy bulk extracts and then they dilute it down. So they start with a sort of homeopathic type level and then they gradually build it up till they get to a maintenance dose. And to be fair, I mean, that was what we used to do in Europe probably about 100 years ago. So there is a huge potential out there. Some of you who know a bit more about this market will know that there have already been two companies on the oral side that have launched products in the US, and those have not been successful. And the main reason for that is that they've tried to bypass the allergists. There are about 6,000 allergists, and they're the people who give these injections. And the reason that they obviously make quite a lot of money from all these visits for injections and treatment and so on, and with the oral product, all they do is they give them the prescription for the oral product, and then they don't see the patient at all. So for them, it was something they were never going to promote. Our plan for the US is basically we work with the allergists. So what we'll do is the allergists will buy a product and resell it, so they'll make a markup. They'll charge for the tests that they do and the actual treatment, and the level of adherence will be significantly higher, so they'll get a larger throughput of patients who will actually complete the treatment. And on top of that, currently what happens is a lot of the insurers are simply not paying for the dosing up treatment. So say, for instance, the first 20 injections of that treatment, the insurers are not willing to pay for, because they say, why should we be paying for a treatment when only 16% actually complete it and get some benefit? So with our product, they'll be sure that the patients get full treatment. We announced our results last Wednesday, so I'll just give you a quick update of the highlights. We increased our market share by 1%, 14% of the market. We're about number 3 in the market at the moment, but continuing to grow in a European market that overall is flat or growing slowly. And that comes back to the technology that we've got, the product we've got. Our revenues increased 6.6% to 68.3 million. On constant currency terms, that's about 3.5%, because most of our sales are in euros, so it's obviously affected by the sterling euro rate. And that was in a season where actually there was a low pollen season, so we've done pretty well to continue growing in that market. One thing we work as in general management is to ensure that we leverage the business. So you can see we've grew the top line by 6.6%, but the operating profit pre-R&D we've grown by 26%. So for every increase in sales, we're looking to really put a lot more on the bottom line. Some of you may have seen we had an oversubscribed fundraising in July where we raised 10.6 million, and that was used to the plans for BASIC to extend our phase 3 grass trial. So we finished the end of June with a cash balance of 15.5 million, and we've since added that extra fundraising to it. So the summary and outlook, I'll just give you an indication about the key milestones. We've already reported the successful completion of our phase 2 grass trial, which, as I mentioned, is looking towards driving the US and the European business. Before the end of the year, we'll report our Birch phase 3 trial. That's just for Europe. They're both the PQ technologies. And then looking into next year, we'll basically be expecting the Polyvac phase 1 trials in the first half. That's the mite product in the first half of next year. And in the autumn, we'll be starting the phase 3 grass trial. That's the autumn of next year. So we've got plenty of things coming up into view. And of course, as I mentioned as well, the peanut product, by the end of calendar year 2019, will be starting the first in-human study. So that'll be a point of excitement. Okay, that was all I wanted to say.
Thank you very much indeed. Do you have any questions, please? I said hands up before we give you the mic. Thank you.
I'm a complete ignoramus as regards pharma. I've not invested in pharma yet. When you described the disincentive to inject because of the number of visits to an allergist, practice nurse, possibly in this country, is there a prospect that this can be self-injected, and is there any competitor already doing that, where you inject yourself at home?
Oh, right. No, there isn't, and that comes a bit down to the type of product. So I talked about over-the-counter products, which are a fairly low dose, but what happens is with the immunotherapy treatment, it's always essential that the patient is actually in the surgery, just in case there are any adverse reactions to the product. They're very rare, but you just want to be sure, because if you inject it at home, you've also got to inject exactly to the right depth. It mustn't go too deep. It's got to be in the right place below the skin, and therefore you need an expert to do it. It wouldn't be for an individual to treat themselves.
Is that the only part of the body where you can inject?
Ooh, now you ask me. I think it's usually done in the arms. I think that's generally the way, but I'm not quite sure. I presume you can inject it in other areas.
Question here, please.
Okay.
Yes, I see you're the finance director. Could you say a little bit about your fundraising earlier in the year, what the terms were of that, and how it compares with the current market price of the shares?
The fundraising was done at a slight discount to the market price at that stage, and the share price since has been, to be honest, the share price does vary a bit according to what's happening in the market. At the moment we have a fairly tight holding on the shares. We have 2 large shareholders plus quite a few institutional shareholders, so the free float is not so large. But to be honest, people are waiting now to see what the results of the phase 3 Birch trial are.
Is the price now below what the market?
It is, yes, it is at the moment, yes.
Thank you.
Question at the back, please.
Thank you. It's over here. You mentioned your market in Europe is biggest, like 51 in Germany. Are you prepared for Brexit outcome?
Well, we're hoping, obviously, that a deal is done. For us, there are various, and I think it's true for a lot of pharma companies, there are various levels of complexity. So it's not only a matter of will there be a hard Brexit or soft Brexit, we need to see the detail of it. So, for instance, if we look at the UK has actually already stated publicly that pharma products coming in from continental Europe won't require to be tested again when they actually come into the UK. Now, we're obviously hoping that will be a reciprocal agreement from the EU, but that's not guaranteed. And below that question about what it says in the legislation, there are also the regulators. So we've been talking to the regulators about what potentially they would allow and not allow, because within the rules there are all sorts of levels of complexity. But as well as that, we've already been preparing. So we have I didn't mention here, but we have a second manufacturing facility in Spain, a small manufacturing facility. So we've been increasing the cold storage that we've got there, so we can potentially get product out of the UK before the end of March, just in case there are problems at the borders at that stage. And also been looking, as I said, looking at works there to extend the QC development, so we can actually do testing in Spain as well as the UK. So we are preparing, but for us, obviously the best result would be some type of reciprocal agreement that would leave us roughly in the position we are at the moment.
Thank you.
Lots of questions. Gentleman here had his hand up for 4. Thank you.
You had a diagram of Europe, and you had 4% for Switzerland, 61 for Germany, and you had how much for Spain?
I think it's about 9%. This is this percentage
That's
of our
right.
overall sales. Yeah.
Yes.
It's not,
So how comes you left out a massive market as France?
There are a couple of reasons for that. The French market is a sublingual market. That means it's oral and drops market, which, as I mentioned, we focus more on the subcutaneous injectable side. And the second reason is there are two main manufacturers and suppliers within that market, but it's very, very difficult. There are a lot of regulatory and other barriers to stop other competitors coming into that market. So we simply decided, given the cost we would have to invest in order to get into that market, it's simply not worth it.
Thank you. Question here.
You mentioned that the dust mite was 8 injections, I think. The peanut was 3 injections, and one of the earlier ones was 6 injections. Does that give a permanent cure, or is there going to be a repeat business, so to speak?
We actually recommend that you're treated 3 years in a row, But what tends to happen is we have quite a number of patients who, once they've had 1 year's treatment, their symptoms reduce so much that they simply don't come back for a second year or a third year. We don't have any long-term studies where we've followed patients for 20 years or so on, but we've talked to doctors, and a lot of them say that they do seem to see with quite a few of the patients that they don't come back to their surgeries for another 10, 15 years, and maybe then they come back for a booster or whatever.
Next question, please. Yep.
Right. Does your penetration in Germany suggest that the conditions there are very different, or would you expect other European countries to have the same sort of high amount of business that you do in Germany done over there?
Yes, it varies. What tends to happen is, one, it's a question of the country itself, in the sense of how what tends to happen in a country is either prevalent towards having injectable or oral. So I mentioned about France, which I think is about 85, 90% oral products, whereas Germany is probably something like about 75, 80% injectable products. So first of all, it's obviously a market in which we can really use our product. And secondly, it's a fully reimbursed market. So that means the value of it is higher, and it encourages the patients, and they have a lot of allergists there. Whereas if you, for instance, compared that to, well, you've compared it to the UK, for instance, the treatment in the UK is mostly symptomatic, and there are a small number of allergists. So that means even if your doctor says you should see an allergist, you've only got a limited number of allergists you can see, and therefore it limits the number of patients coming through and getting treatment.
Is that why your percentage is quite low for the UK? Your business?
Yes, yeah.
Question in the front here.
Two questions. Firstly, is there a paediatric version of Polynex?
There isn't a specific paediatric treatment. So what happens is that the product is also the same product is used for children as is used for grown-ups. I mean, the tendency is for small children, they tend to go more with the oral if they're very small children. But if they're teenagers or whatever, then they tend to have the same treatment as the grown-ups. Yeah.
And what will you be doing for the dust mites with regard to children?
The dust mites, what we always tend to do is first of all we do a trial for adults first of all, and then at a later stage we'll go on to do a paediatric study.
Do you have any other questions, please? Some excellent stuff here. Chris, gentleman here with the glasses, please.
Thank you. Good evening, Nick.
Good evening.
Circassia had a very high-profile allergy phase 3 failure about 15 months ago, where despite very good phase 2 results, they had a very large placebo response in their phase 3 and hence didn't meet the primary endpoints. I don't think they've ever satisfactorily explained why that was, but what do you do in your trials to avoid that problem of a big placebo response so you don't go down the Circassia route?
It is somewhat of a challenge. I have to be honest with you. The allergy trials are the type of trials where there is always that risk that you do get a big placebo effect. The fact that people get injected with something and they psychologically think that it's helping them when it's not. We do attempt not to overhype the product, to make sure that our investigators are properly trained and so on, in order to try and keep the patients in a situation where they're more, less likely to become over enthusiastic about the product and the treatment and so on. And I think it's also the case that we also filter the patients before they come into the trial. Not to say that Circassia didn't, and I think in this case of Circassia, I think that they also struggle from the cat. This is the cat one that you're talking about. Yeah, it seems to be, and I don't quite, well, I guess you can guess if you're a cat owner, but I think it seems to be a lot of the patients were desperate to be cured, and therefore they thought they were taking something, they were desperate to be cured, and therefore they said they were better even when it hadn't had an effect on them. So what we tend to do is we try to filter the patients, so we ensure that we've got, you know, people who simply suffer from whatever the allergy we're looking at, so they don't suffer from other allergies, so we have a complexity when we measure it in the field. and go through various processes to try. But to be truthful with you, there's no real way of absolutely stopping that happening. It's part of the nature of the trials, and it's always a risk.
Excellent question.
Thank
I've
you.
got time for one more question.
A little bit confused about why you need the trials for the grass if you're already shown to be successful in Germany, for example.
Right. Yes. What's happened, I didn't explain the full background to it. What's happened is in about 2010, there was legislation in the EU. So previously what had happened is, because allergy is quite a special treatment, it had always been done on a specific patient basis. So in other words, you went into doctor's surgery, you had some tests, the doctors wrote out a prescription, and that was created for you, and then you were injected with whatever was the injection that was made for you. So it was done on a named patient basis. So for every prescription was sent out, something was made up. Now, at a certain stage, what happened was that the whole market seemed to be named patient basis, and the EU decided that they wanted to move to a stage where all the products had gone through a full set of clinical trials and full documentation and so on. And therefore, they brought in this legislation, and Germany was the first country that actually moved to actually enact this legislation, which requires all companies in the allergy field to take their products through a series of clinical trials. Now, obviously, we have circumstantial evidence in the sense of the doctors who've used our products and the patients who've been treated with it and so on, but we don't have that in a proper independent data set where we've done it testing against a placebo and with all the, as I say, with all the patient data fully consolidated. These live trials, which are now starting to become more popular, and you've probably heard GSK's done one or two, but the trouble is tracking back to try and get all that data from the market would just be too big a thing. So we're moving forward with those trials, although the products are being sold on the market at the moment, as you say, in Germany and other countries.
Lovely. Okay, I think we're out of time on that one. Nick, thank you very much indeed. That's excellent.
Thank you.